can get started. Over to you, Lizzie.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dave. So I was going to talk today about some methods that I've actually used in at work in professional settings, and prototype usability testing has by far been the most frequent one I've used, and it is very, very useful. But I just wanted to talk about some other methods as well. And I'll be also sharing a link to 20 plus different methods that you can have a look at. So we're going to look at the user interview, on-site process observation, tree testing, card sorting, focus groups and desktop research, and sort of looking at the good and bad side of that. And also I've been on the other side of some of them, so just going to mention a few things about that. I've marked some of them as discovery. Any of these can be done at any time, but some of them are more suited to being done as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So yeah, prototype usability testing. Sometimes people have visions of that being in a sort of a lab, and you've got to book time in a research agency or have all the kit. But it can be, it's very flexible, and it can be done in a very low cost way. Most of the user research tools I've actually used the free versions and got a lot from them. Marvel app, for example, it's a really great way of prototyping rapidly. You don't even need to make a wireframe with all the exact accurately drawn little fields and wireframing. You can actually sketch on a piece of paper, take a photo with your phone, upload it to the app. You've got to have the app installed, and then you can actually then transfer that to your desktop and add hotspots, and you can add hotspots on the phone as well, and you can then just immediately tweak things on the spot, and you can also make a sort of more sophisticated design using the laptop. So that can be done completely free. I've done that for British Red Cross, for Content Design London's own site, and it just works really well. So you don't need to have massive technical skills to prototype, is I guess what I'm saying there. Next slide, please.
Just before we do, I think Adrian's just popped his hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, might be a bit of a dim question. I wanted to check what hotspots were.
Oh, sure. So it's just, it's what they call it in Marvel for adding a link. So, so you've got your sketch, and say you want to have one apply here, or apply now. So you can just hover over that in the app and make it a link, and then link it to your next drawing. So you could have like a series of 4 drawings that you've taken photos on your phone, and you can link them all up. So that's all that means.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you. So if you do have someone on the team with coding expertise, a good way, if you're going to be using coding in the final design, or I know some people use GOS, and Dave told me a few other tech applications that you might have for council websites, and you can obviously code in one of those, and this is a link to how you would do that in GitHub, and in the resources we'll share at the end, there's a sort of how-to for GitHub. So yeah, if anyone, the good thing about that is that then you get obviously a consistent environment to what the final design, the final service would look like when it's on your website. So that's the advantage of that one. Next slide, please. So the good points about usability, prototype usability testing, is that you can find out how people get on with the design. They can get insights to things that you, as the designer of it, as someone that knows the service inside out, might not spot. So exactly like when Adrian asked about hotspots, you know, I hadn't thought about that. So I can, if I was to do this again, I could iterate and explain that in the slide. And that's exactly how usability testing works and iterating. So you can do it remotely as well. With that, you can either do it on Zoom with them or send them a list of tasks. Ideally, they would record themselves doing it, because it's about seeing whether they get through, but also seeing what obstacles they might come up against. And ideally, you would have a few people observing or watching the recording afterwards. Taking notes. We tend to take notes on Post-its because that limits how much you write per note, and it keeps it brief and it keeps it factual. And it should always be like a direct observation of what someone did or said, rather than any kind of analysis at that stage. Next slide, please. So yeah, then afterwards you would analyse it, and you gather together all the observation notes, find common themes that users struggled with, and anything that kind of blocked them from completing a task. And then you can adapt the prototype design, retest it if a lot has changed, or carry on with that. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's good and bad. I'm not going to read out all of this, but it will be shared afterwards. But some of the great points is that we've already touched on is that you do see users' reactions to it. But I suppose that, especially if you're doing it on Marvel and not in the real software, then it won't be completely accurate. It will just give you an idea. There's a lot of big things you can spot, but maybe some of the finer tuned things you may not spot, especially if it's to do with people using accessible text to access the service. Also, unless you're actually going to the person's home or office, then you will have the kind of lab effect, even if it's in your meeting room and not actually in a lab. It's not the person's own equipment, it's not their own environment. And you can end up sort of focusing in on something which came up with a few people in the lab that maybe not be such a big deal in real life. So with all of these methods, there's good points and bad points, but that's why it's quite good to do more than one. I guess the other thing would be that this prototype testing by its very nature comes later in the process. So it's better to do some research earlier on, because otherwise you might have been making a lot of assumptions about what you're designing. And prototype usability testing could actually tell you things that if you'd done some user interviews, for example, earlier, you might have found out and designed something different. So I guess for me, that would be the main con about it in terms of pros and cons. And that's why I'm just really keen to share some of the other options. And on that note, next slide, please, Dave.
Yeah, we will move on. Just to give Lizzie a brief break from talking. Shall we just say? I mean, what's quite interesting about this one, I think, for me, is not only is there an element here with the doing usability testing on prototypes, is not only is it the whole user testing bit that can be potentially new to councils, but also, I mean, how many of the folk on the call, does anybody want to talk about whether you are actually producing prototypes in the first place in terms of building additional services, or are most people kind of sort of almost skipping that stage and leaping straight into building the actual thing, and then sort of crossing fingers and hoping that it turns into the right thing? Does anybody want to talk about their experiences of prototyping or not prototyping before we move on to the next bit? Adrian, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy
Again.
to talk about my experience. So I come from a mostly like a local government background. So user testing and prototyping has often been a bit, oh, wouldn't it be nice, or wouldn't it be nice if we had time for this? So generally speaking, in local government, it's been we build the thing. We build the thing with what information we've got and what context we've got. And we build it not with the approach of, we really hope you like this. We build it knowing that there may be things that will need to change, and it kind of adapts as we go. I must admit that can cause a bit of a headache, because you spend time creating a specification, creating the actual piece of work. And as you say, Lizzie, if perhaps more conversations were had up front, perhaps less time would have been spent developing test sort of prototypes and things. So yeah, not something I do a lot, but something I do recognize the value of, and hope to see a bit more in the public sector, I must admit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Tass, did you want to come in on this one?
Yeah, it's all brand new to the council. I work at Warwick District Council. I'm doing the first lot of user testing that's ever been done, and that's for our noise nuisance service. So we are literally in the process of doing, we use Try My UI, which is a pool of people across the country, and they get to actually test out the web pages, and you get a video of what they're doing, and then you can like watch it back. So there's obviously a cost attached to that. And I know that our web manager does that, but we don't normally do any user testing at all. So yeah, it's all a bit scary. So I'm glad I'm here. Thank you.
Fab, we've got another raised hand, but for some reason Zoom isn't telling me what your name is, I'm afraid. So
oh, it's all right. It's my name's Jan. I'm coming up as Tom Steele, but
you are, aren't you? Oh, does that mean you're
obviously I'm lumped
related?
as my husband, and that's not, it's me.
Oh,
anyway,
I see.
So hi.
Hi.
I actually work for a charity. So wrong thing. And I've never worked for local government at all. My background's in marketing, but what's quite interesting is that the charity that I currently work for, in the marketing team, has an absolutely mahoosive marketing spend, and I'm actually trying to reframe all of it and say, you know, if you truly recognise your user needs, and you did this user testing in your service design, and you did all of this at the beginning, so maybe you front-ended and reinvested some of that budget, your marketing spend would massively decrease over time, because what you're saying is you're not doing, we don't do any of this. So which is something that I would like to change. But as a service charity, you know, we provide 30 different services, so we should be doing this. So, you know, obviously what happens is they don't do any of this stuff, and then they come, and then no one uses the service, because obviously it's not quite the service that they want, or it's not delivered in the way that they want it, all of those kind of things. And then of course that puts a massive pressure on marketing, because then what they want is 6 million posters to try and drive people to a service that they probably didn't even want in the first place. So I think this is really interesting for me, because I think sort of wider than local government, there's a real need to be just like, you know, it seems to be quite a trendy thing at the moment, doesn't it? Oh, we put the users at the heart of everything that we do. But in my opinion, unless you do all of this stuff, then you don't. Because how do you know? So
you're just guessing. Yeah.
You're just, it's all based on assumption, and normally it's based on assumption from a person that isn't the target audience. So
absolutely right.
How do
Great stuff. Yeah, that really good point to make. So yeah, before we go, I mean, as I say, you know, I'm interested in how we can make it easier for all organizations, really. I mean, obviously councils are the ones closest to my heart, but you know, to be able to get into this idea of prototyping in particular, because oftentimes, you know, it also shows something, doesn't it? There's a thing there. You can show the thing quite quickly if you're not necessarily just sort of aiming for perfection from straight away. So I think, you know, getting into more prototyping and stuff is not just good for user research, but it's also good practice to get into anyway, I think. But anyway, that's enough of that. Let's move on. Lizzie, user interviews.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. You can do, yeah, this prototyping per se doesn't need to be saved to the end. You know, you can do it when you're trying to find solutions, and or I shouldn't say solutions, when you're trying to see what might work in alpha, or near the beginning of the process. So just to sort of make something real rather than conceptual. So yeah, exactly. And I think Marvel is just such a great way of being able to do it on a really minimal budget and without any real design or technical skills in terms of graphic design, I mean. But something that which kind of dovetails in quite well with what we were saying in terms of like finding what people actually want before making the thing and before marketing it at them. User interviews are just a really good way of finding out what people actually using the service or wanting to use the service need, and helping you understand where they're coming from, what they need to do, and you know, you can't, there's no way of finding that out except asking people. So you can steer the conversation, you can make it quite set to find out what you want to get, but you can also sort of ask more and drill down more on things that they might come up with that hadn't occurred to you. And that's why they're a lot more flexible than surveys or questionnaires, because you've got the live conversation there in front of you. I mean, obviously that can be done remotely still, and it could be done out of sync. You know, you could, asynchronous communication about it. But I think the important point is that you've got a sort of flow, and you can ask for more detail on points that they've made. Another reason why in person, or I guess on Zoom, is that you can pick up on body language, and people that are skilled, really, you know, professional user researchers will know a lot about psychology and body language as well. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do any just because we're not. It's better, any user research, well, if done properly, pretty much any user research is better than just assuming things without any evidence.
Fab. Tass, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, just a real quickie. We don't have any user researchers at the council, and I'm new to all of this. So I did do some interviews, but didn't actually do them with members of the public. I managed to get some councillors and other members of staff to interview. But what I found was that I really struggled to have a natural conversation while at the same time thinking about open questions and all the rest of it. So I know you run a consultancy, and you know, Sally Ware's here, but is there a way to get experience, even like as a role? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, we've at the end we've got some like free and low cost courses in user research. For me, it was kind of on the job observing user researchers. But with those interviews, I would always have scripted questions to follow. The conversation might veer off, and there might be an interesting tangent. There might be a tangent that you can tell is just not relevant, and you might have to sort of steer back away from. But yeah, I'd always have a sort of framework of questions and know why I'm asking the question, what I'm trying to get out of it. And
I did all of that.
Right.
Maybe I was just nervous. Maybe that was it. But anyway.
I suspect that is a big bit of it, and kind of as Lizzie says, you know, it's definitely one of those things that gets easier with practice. Claire in the comments has just said, have you tried just taking someone along to take some notes for you? So there's always that. I've always wanted one of those. What's that word? Is it amnuensis or something, isn't it? Like those medieval people that wander around writing down everything you say. I've always wanted one of those, but maybe you should get one for work, Tass. The other thing though, I was just going to say, Tass, if it would be helpful, I mean, I know some of the other councils I'm working with, they are doing user research on a regular basis. Do you want me to find out if you can just tag along on some of that, so you can just see how they get on with it? Yeah, no worries, we can sort that out. And that goes for everyone as well. It's not just special privileges for Tass, but if that would be of interest, then just let us know. Fabulous. Okay, back to Lizzie.
Yeah, great. So exactly, I think that you can't really beat seeing people who already practiced in it, seeing what they do. Service designers as well, if you have any of them, they're just very good at knowing what sort of questions to ask and continually asking questions. Yeah, so again, with each of these, there's the good for, not good for, and challenges. It's just good for finding out. You can't really, I'm not into personas. Personas is basically a lot of guesswork, really, because everyone is completely unique and there's multiple facets to everyone. So someone may be of one user group, but also 3 or 4 others, and it crosses over. So it's just really great to talk to people, find out what they need, what their motivations for things are. I guess not so good for, and this is why we'll move on to user observation. Sometimes people aren't that in touch with what they actually do, and they think they would do something in a situation, or they might report on what they currently do as differently from what they actually do. They might be so used to doing certain steps that they just don't even think to mention them. And there could be just some things they're not comfortable about talking about. But there are methods that we'll get onto that help with those. Yeah, as you can see in the challenges, there's that people might try and give the best possible impression to the interviewer, and there could be bias on either side. And it's important, and will be when we get onto the drilling down method as well, like not to pressure people, and to try and sense if it's time to move on to something else. I think was there a couple of...
Yeah, Paul's just popped into the text chat. What's a good alternative to personas to illustrate users' journeys and pain points and help sort of translate that to the service?
Well, so I just think that you doing user interviews and all these different methods, rather than inventing personas. And if you do want to have someone on the journey map that you're referencing, just use a real user. Just use someone you've spoken to, or several different ones to represent several different user types. But instead of making up a mishmash of taking something from someone and making this persona, use an actual person. Yeah,
that's good advice. Yeah, I think you're right, Lizzie. Because I think that the danger is that once I think personas can sometimes be quite useful, can't they? I mean, it's always helpful when they're based on real people, like you say. But the danger with them is always that they're used as a shortcut. So people think, well, we've got this. They just start referring to the persona and seeing it as a way of not having to do the hard yards in terms of going to speak to those people again, or what have you. So that is the danger. So actually, yeah, sort of abandoning the idea of generic personas and just using actual real people sounds like a really good way to go about that.
Cool.
Fab.
Next slide, please.
Yep.
So there's the one where you're more of a fly on the wall, and so you actually go to the place and have a look at how someone is doing the job in their own working environment. You can see the equipment they're using, the systems, the level of tech, and ability, in fact, as well, and how much is still done on paper, how far they might have to walk to collect a certain file. I've seen all this in recordings, and it just gives you a much more realistic picture of what's going on. I mean, especially if you're doing digital transformation, you can look at it helps you see what could be made more efficient, and what bits are particular sticking points. And a lot of the time it's just that the systems can be quite tricky to use as well, and that can actually put people off digital when it doesn't necessarily need to be like that. Yeah, so that would just be basically getting clearance to go on site somewhere and see a process taking place. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's lots of good for, not good for, and challenges again. I guess getting access to the site, that can be something that puts people off. And there's some logistics involved in that, but there's logistics involved in getting people onto your site, or having it in another place. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. And also you've just got the advantages that it's them in their natural environment, and if people are using assistive technology, that's all set up the way that they would use it. So yeah, I won't go through everything because we've got a few more to cover, but next slide, please.
I mean, just to reiterate, yeah, slides will be going out to everybody, so you'll be able to read through at your leisure later on.
I'm sure lots of people have heard about this one or already doing it. So tree testing is about categorizing, really, and it's helpful for planning the IA and the menus. So it's just sort of checking in with users as to whether where you would put something is necessarily where they would. Sometimes you might get a clash where equal amounts of users would put it in different places, and then it's just a case of making sure you've got strong cross-referencing. So I worked on Great Western Railway sites, and there was quite a lot that could have been in either booking tickets or customer services. So we just made sure that there was easy linking between the two if once we put them in one part of the navigation. And I know that Jerry McGovern, who's brilliant on lots of digital things, especially around content, and he did a big public tree jack survey, which is one of the tools from Option Workshop, and there's a free trial of that. You can, oh no, typo, sorry, there should be a K in Workshop. Yeah, there's so you can get a lot done with their free trial, and you know, you don't have to spend on the full version. And yeah, basically he did it for coronavirus, and where people might look different categories for different information. So that was just a really good way of getting mass input on that. I think like over 1,000 people filled in, maybe multiples of thousands. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's about sort of sense checking your content hierarchy decisions, and problems. It might not, it's not going to do everything. So that's why, again, just saying a variety of different methods is better than just relying on any one. And yeah, you could get people sort of not finding the label they would give it, and then just sort of choosing the best of two options available, when actually neither of them neither may make sense when they're actually looking for it. Were there any questions around that, Dave?
Not specifically about tree testing, I don't think, but I'll pick one of the others if you like. So one of the questions was, do you have any views on, where are we about to have here? Oh yes, so this was Peter's question. So is there anything about the number of responses that you need to have valid data? I suppose that's a general question across all of the things we've been talking about this morning. Is there like a tipping point where the data becomes useful, or is even just one or two responses enough?
Well, I'd say you could always spot, you can always spot more by doing some user testing. I guess there's a danger that you can give if you have very few people. You know, there's some things that will be valid, like a typo, for example, or something like that that's just like a mistake, and it's something that's not working, not functioning. But in terms of usability on a sort of more nuanced level, if you've only got a couple of people, it can skew it a bit too much, that it might not be a problem for everyone. One of the things with usability is if someone completes the task, it's not necessarily a fail. They might find it hard along the way and things could be improved. But if they do complete the task, then it might just have taken them a bit longer. And that's not necessarily meaning that the design needs to be thrown away. It's just, yeah, that it could highlight some things that are better. But we usually say, you know, if just one user has said something isn't working for them and the other 5 in that round, it's not a problem for, we wouldn't really change something based on just that one user, but you'd bear it in mind. But that's why when we analyze, we look for themes. But you'd usually have sort of, well, basically the more the better, really, and then finding themes. There is some stats about how, I don't know, the first 6 or 7 show you 70% of the usability issues. I try not to promote that too much because it's only 70% of them and you're not finding that other 30. So it's not something that means, oh, you only need to test with 6 or 7 people. But on the other hand, if you don't test with anyone at all, you're not finding any of that, any of the issues. So yeah.
Yeah.
The more the better, really.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I suppose the other thing to say is just that don't let the fact that you might not get very many people engaging or what have you hold you back from doing it. So talking to one person is better than talking to none, as long as you take into account that it is just only one person, so they're unlikely to be representative of everybody. But nonetheless, having spoken to one user will probably result in the fact that you've got greater empathy with the users of your service and that kind of thing. Something may well come up that you've not thought about before, so it still is absolutely worth doing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, especially if it's something that you have not had, well, we're never the users, but if it's something that's really unfamiliar to you, then talking to that one user who's actually trying to I don't know, start get a business license or something like that, use the town hall, I'm not sure what it might be, because you'll just get insights even from one person then if it's something you've not done yourself. Yeah, but as Dave said, remember that is just the one person.
Fabulous. So we've got quite a few other questions popping up. I'm answering some of them in the chat, but if there's things that we don't get to during the session, because we've already only got 15 minutes left.
Oh yeah. Okay.
What we'll do is, what Lizzie and I will do is, those that we don't answer in the session, we'll write our answers down and send them around when we send out the slides and everything else. So you'll get them then. But we'll move on from tree testing into card sorting.
Okay. So this is again, it's a bit helping make sure that you're giving the right labels to content items. So you can have the top level labels and then page names, and then see where people, what categories they would put those pages under. So it's just a way of sort of getting to know people's mental grouping of things. And you can do it so that people can come up with their own names as well with that one, or you can just limit it to the ones you've already come up with. Next slide, please. I'll just skip over this and people can read it in their own time, just so that we can cover some more. So a focus group, that can be good to sort of at the very start to find out various people's views in one go. So sort of cutting down on logistics a little bit. But the downside of it is that you do often get one person leading the discussion, and unless you've got a really skilled moderator, then it can be quite hard to hear from everyone, and to also not have that sort of the louder people influencing what some of the other people say. So I've actually been on the other side of focus groups and sort of found that happening. So yeah, I've sort of covered some of that. So if we could go to the next slide, thank you. So desktop research is sort of doing as much detective work as you can from your desk, looking at similar systems that have been built. So for example, I worked on a little bit on Verify, so looking at a lot of other digital identity programs already happening in Europe. And it can also be looking at competitors, looking at language, social media, forums, Google Trends, all sorts of things, just to try and find out as much about how these things are being used and what people are calling them. And next slide, please. Yeah, so that is another way of thinking of issues that you might not have thought of, and understanding more about your users, because obviously there's so much online discussion nowadays that you can find out a lot from actual users without necessarily meeting them directly. Next slide, please. So yeah, I've been on the other side of these different methods. The user interview is the most intense for making sure you get an accurate idea of what that user actually thinks. The diary study is, I would say, the easiest one for people to accidentally fall behind on, and then maybe fudge a bit as they try and fill in the days afterwards. So wouldn't necessarily recommend that one. Feedback on a page is like an alternative to that generic survey on the front of the website, where you actually have a little of, as they do on gov.uk, have a button on the actual page saying, is there anything about this actual page, or the end of a new service. Yeah, the tree testing works really well for just sense checking where you might home things. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's a load more methods, and I realise this might be a bit overwhelmed if people are completely new to user research, but I've got little synopses of each of them, like we've had for the first 7, with what they are, and then the good and not good and challenges, and it's all free on that link. So yeah. Skipping on, then one, very important to consider diversity in your user research, and that, think about the product team and design team building the service, as well as who you recruit to research it. And there's physical and cognitive disabilities, low literacy, digital literacy as well, as race, gender, and socioeconomic considerations. There's quite a lot of information on gov.uk about how you would go about finding participants in a sort of diverse and inclusive way. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what do you think, Dave? Have we got time for the activity?
I think we certainly got time, probably to do these two. So what we're after is a couple of volunteers. So please don't make me pick on people, because that really would be unfortunate. But what we would like is some volunteer. We need 2 volunteers to give laddering a go. Do you want to very quickly explain what laddering involves as sort of part of as part of user research, Lizzie?
Yeah, so it's not taking someone's first answer. It's trying to kind of unpick why they've said that, or what their real motivation is. So it's something that if you've been around children or have children, you'll be very familiar with, where people sort of keep asking you why. And it's it's a way of sort of trying to understand the world and trying to get to the bottom of why something is. A lot of, I mean, as adults, I suppose a lot of the time we just take things for granted that that's how things are. But when you're trying to find out about a user, you can't just take their first explanation for something, because they may not even realize themselves why they think something until you kind of interrogate them almost. But you have to be careful with that, not to actually interrogate them. So sort of keeping it quite upbeat and lighthearted.
Fab. Okie dokie. So let's give this a go, and bearing that in mind. So basically it's just asking why as many times as they can. I see that at the moment we're asking for volunteers. Claire has decided to leave. I'm sure that is I'm sure that's a coincidence, but I'm going to pick on people that have got their cameras showing. And so I think what we're going to do is we are going to ask Paul, and we're going to ask Tom Steele to have a go at laddering. So which of you really likes cheese?
I do.
So Paul,
because I can't eat it, so that's a good start.
That is very good. So Tom, do you want to quiz Paul on what his favorite cheese is, and then keep asking why until he is really annoyed with you?
Hi, Paul. Can you tell me what your favorite cheese is, please?
Do you know what? First thing to my head is probably cheddar. I'm thinking about it.
And why would you pick cheddar?
I think because it works with everything. So cheese on toast goes in food, goes in most foods. Having said that, I'm starting to think Parmesan now.
But why do you think it goes well on toast?
I think it's one of those real comfort things. You know, cheese on toast, bit of onion on top as well, maybe a slice of tomato. I think it's one of those sort of go-to things when you need a bit of a pick-me-up. It's certainly it's certainly this time of year thing. I've had it more than I've had previously.
Why would you say that cheddar works better than, say, a brie?
It's circumstance. We had brie the other night. Would you believe that? No, it wasn't brie. We had camembert the other night. That was really nice as well, actually. So, like I say, I do like cheese. So
that's coming across.
I have loads of cheese. To be honest, I'm thinking Parmesan because I like that in risotto. I'm a really big fan of risotto. So, do you know, I'm very much a cheese for the moment. I'm not really a fan with cheese with fruit in it. If you know, to be honest, I like my. So my favourite cheese, I'd probably buy more cheddar, right? But that's probably because I like it in all the time. Because it's my go-to sort of, I must have it. Whereas other stuff I tend to buy it for recipes. Although I've always got Parmesan in as well, actually. But that tends to go in things.
Okay.
I think our learning from this user research exercise is don't ask Paul about cheese.
No, I was just going to say that's really brilliant because we could pick up on quite a lot of things there. That if we just asked what the favourite was and had cheddar and it had stopped there, we wouldn't have learnt as much as we did. Like we learnt about how on toast it's for comfort, and then it's different types of favourite cheeses for different kind of applications, if you will. So yeah. You can get, just by asking why a couple of times, you can get really rich responses.
Fantastic. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, so I think we're probably going to pause on the second activity there. But obviously, you know, within your teams, when you're off the call, it's absolutely something you can try out on each other, and you know, just to try to get have a bit of a practice of doing this kind of stuff. We've also got some great stuff in the slides there around another activity around specific local government services, and there's some links in the slides that you can click on where Lizzie has shared some absolutely brilliant sort of service patterns around you know, sort of what came out of the user research and what the user journeys look like, and various, and there's also some process maps and stuff. And I must admit, outside of just this user research thing, I'm actually really excited about this because I've never seen this before, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. But everyone do go and have a look at that kind of stuff. Lizzie, do you want to talk through some of the tips and things that people could do next?
Oh yeah, so earlier Taz was asking about getting into user research or just sort of gaining experience. I mean, following user researchers on Twitter, Medium and LinkedIn is really brilliant, because you can pick up a lot from that. There's quite a few meetups, so if you just go on meetup.com and look for user research, obviously there were a lot more, they were in person before the pandemic, but several of them have carried on online. We'll get to some low budget user research options on the next slide. Obviously hire a user researcher if you can, because of their skill set, but also because you can learn from them whilst they're there. So you could have one for a short time and learn as much as you can. Trying out rapid prototyping is great. And obviously the desktop tools as well, which often have free trials. Next slide, please. Yeah, so here we go. So this, I asked for people to recommend low cost user research training courses, and quite a few people recommended the Future Learn one. I haven't done that myself yet, but it looks really great. And it's about online and offline. So that's really good. That suggests it's going beyond prototyping too. I mean, beyond usability testing. Research. There's Pluralsight people recommended as well, usertesting.com with a free trial. You can do these 4 courses. I've also made a module which basically includes 20 to 30 methods and goes through them as we've mentioned. And there's a lot of other user-centered design training on that site too. Next slide, please. This is basically just what I mentioned before about how you can learn a lot from having a professional user researcher there. Next slide, please. And if you do invite people to your organisation, just a few considerations about making the environment accessible. A lot of it will cross over with how you make meetings accessible. And yeah, I was going to ask if anyone had any other thoughts on that, but I'm not sure if we've got time for that. Is there a next slide? Oh yes, great. So I've also done a shout out to try and find agencies that help recruit for a diverse range of participants, and these have come up as people for research and criteria, especially for diversity, and the other 2 are sort of very online, I think. Yeah, they may also be good for diversity, but they're good starting points for if you don't know where to start for finding participants. Next slide, please. These are some of the famous books. Erica Hall's Just Enough Research, which is really good and really great for increasing your confidence around user research. Lou Downs' Good Services, about creating services. So yeah, obviously it involves user research. The Scope team do a lot of user research. They do a lot of co-creating and have got really good blogs. And British Red Cross is doing a lot of kind of grassroots level co-working in communities. The transformation team is quite a big organisation, but that team's doing a lot. And then there's the how-to on GitHub that I mentioned earlier.
Fab, and I think that is that in terms of all the slides. So thank you so much to Lizzie, for all the prep that you put in there, and also for taking us through all of that stuff. It's absolutely terrific. A few people have had to drop away from the call naturally because we are slightly over time. So apologies for that. But just to summarize, I think, and to let you know what happens next, for those of you that ask questions and things in the chat that we didn't get around to asking, we'll write up some answers to those and we'll distribute those. So you'll get an email from me in a bit with a copy of the slides, a copy of those answers, some other links and bits and pieces that we might not have included from elsewhere, and also a link to the recording as well, so you can go back and watch some of the other bits. So thanks everybody for joining us. It's been absolutely terrific. big thanks again to Lizzie for everything she's done. That's been absolutely brilliant. And you will. We'll also put a link in there so you can find Lizzie on Twitter and that kind of thing. So if you want to get in touch with her about stuff, then you can do so. But thanks everybody for your input and everything else. And if I don't speak to you beforehand, have a wonderful Christmas and a very happy New Year. And I look forward to hearing about all the user research you're going to be doing in the near future. Great stuff. Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.
No worries. Bye.
Bye.